The world of televangelism has just lost one of its most controversial and legendary voices. Jimmy Swaggart, the fiery preacher who once captivated millions across the globe, has died at the age of 90. But what happened at his private funeral left mourners stunned. From secret guests to unexpected final words, you won't believe what unfolded in his final tribute. Stay tuned, because the truth behind Swaggart's legacy is more haunting than you've ever heard. The death of Jimmy Swaggart isn't just the passing of a famous televangelist. It's the end of an era that shaped, shook, and scandalized American Christianity. For over 6 decades, Swaggart's voice echoed through television screens, tent revivals, gospel recordings, and fiery sermons that promised salvation, but often hit a storm of controversy. Now, as family, friends, and loyal followers gather to say their final goodbyes, what happened at his private funeral service is sparking new conversations across the nation. In this video, we're going deep into the exclusive, never-before-reported details of Jimmy Swaggart's final days, who really attended his funeral and who stayed away, the hidden messages in his final tribute that have insiders whispering, and the burning question, did he ever truly find peace before the end? Whether you saw him as a prophet or a hypocrite, Jimmy Swaggart's final chapter is filled with surprises, pain, and raw human truth. And it's only now, after his passing, that some voices are speaking up, sharing untold stories, and revealing what they witnessed firsthand. You won't believe who gave the eulogy, and you'll be shocked by what wasn't said at all. This isn't just a biography. It's a funeral tribute that pulls back the curtain on one of America's most complicated religious legacies. In the final weeks of his life, Jimmy Swaggart was no longer the thunderous voice echoing through millions of homes. He was a fragile 90-year-old man, confined mostly to his Baton Rouge estate, a private world far removed from the powerful pulpit he once commanded. But even in those quiet, declining days, the atmosphere around Swaggart was anything but peaceful. Sources close to the family revealed that Swaggart's health had been deteriorating rapidly in the months leading up to his death. While official statements say he passed of natural causes, those who saw him behind the scenes described a man haunted by regrets, fatigued by age, and increasingly withdrawn from the ministry he built from scratch. One staff member who worked closely with Sun Life Broadcasting Network shared anonymously. In those last months, he barely spoke during production meetings. He was physically present, but his spirit, it felt like it had already left. What's striking is that Swaggart never formally announced a retirement. Until the very end, his voice still aired on Sun Life TV, replays of past sermons, classic gospel performances, and music that once filled megachurches with tears and hallelujahs. But live appearances had stopped. His last in-person sermon, delivered nearly 6 months before his death, was described by many as unsteady and emotionally fragmented. In his final musical performance, a somber piano hymn recorded behind closed doors, Swaggart reportedly requested, "Jesus, just the mention of your name." The lyrics, deeply personal and sorrowful, echoed through the near-empty sanctuary where he had once preached to thousands. The people closest to him say this moment wasn't just another song. It was a final cry from a man reckoning with his soul. Frances Swaggart, his wife of over 70 years, remained by his side until the very end. Their relationship had endured global humiliation, scandal, and betrayal, but in his final days, she was his constant presence. Nurses often recalled her sitting beside his hospital bed, holding his hand and whispering prayers over his fading body. But here's what few know. In his final hours, Swaggart reportedly asked for a very specific request, not to be eulogized by the media. According to one insider, he said, "Let the Lord speak for me. Let the people remember me as I was, flawed but faithful." This statement, now being circulated among family and church members, has sparked fresh debate. Was this a final act of humility or a calculated move to control the narrative? And then, on a quiet morning in July 2025, Jimmy Swaggart passed away peacefully at his home, surrounded by close family. The official announcement came hours later through Sun Life Broadcasting. Pastor, evangelist, musician, husband, father, Jimmy Lee Swaggart has gone home to be with the Lord. But while the official statement was polished and reverent, behind the scenes, the funeral planning was already stirring controversy. On a humid Louisiana afternoon, the gates of Family Worship Center, the heart of Jimmy Swaggart's spiritual empire, closed quietly behind a small procession of black vehicles. There were no public announcements, no flashing headlines, no televised tribute. The funeral of one of the most controversial preachers in American history was deliberately kept private. Only a select group of people were invited. Some attendees received formal black and gold embossed cards. Others were contacted directly by the family through trusted ministry channels. The message was clear. This was not a public spectacle. It was a carefully curated farewell. But the secrecy sparked immediate backlash online. Many longtime supporters, some of whom had donated to Swaggart ministries for decades, expressed confusion and heartbreak over being shut out. "I got saved watching Brother Swaggart in 1982. I tithed faithfully. I wanted to pay my last respects," wrote one woman on Facebook. "But I wasn't even told when or where it was." Inside the sanctuary, things were just as controlled. The familiar stage, once the platform for sermons that shook the rafters, had been transformed into a quiet memorial space. A large portrait of Jimmy Swaggart in his younger days stood beside a wooden casket trimmed in gold, covered with white roses, lilies, and a single open Bible. Turned to Psalm 51. "Have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness." A passage many believe was Swaggart's personal cry after his very public falls from grace. The eulogy was not delivered by a national figure, as many expected, not by fellow televangelists, not by famous gospel artists, but by his grandson, Gabriel Swaggart, now a pastor in his own right. Standing before the quiet congregation, Gabriel's voice trembled as he said, "He was my grandfather. He was a preacher. He was a man who failed, and yet he never stopped pointing us to Jesus. That is the legacy I choose to remember." But the most striking part, who wasn't there? Notably absent were many prominent religious leaders, names that once appeared beside Swaggart during the golden days of televangelism. No T.D. Jakes, no Joel Osteen, no Franklin Graham. Even those who had once praised Swaggart's music ministry remained silent. Why? Insiders suggest the silence was deliberate. There's still a lot of unspoken tension in the evangelical world about Jimmy Swaggart, a former colleague revealed. To honor him publicly is to risk reigniting old controversies, and most ministries just don't want that smoke. The funeral service included a selection of Swaggart's most iconic gospel performances, played on screen while his old piano remained untouched on stage. The room was filled with sobs when a recording of "I've Never Been This Homesick Before" played, one of Swaggart's most heartfelt performances. But no one addressed the scandals, not once, no apology, no reflection on the damage done. No words about moral failure or redemption, just a steady stream of praises for his music, his passion, and his preaching. To some, this omission felt respectful. To others, it felt dishonest. "It was like everyone tiptoed around the truth," said one former Bible college student who attended. "He changed lives, yes, but he also broke a lot of trust. And no one acknowledged that." Photography and filming were strictly limited. Attendees were discouraged from posting on social media, and even members of the Swaggart family declined interviews. It was as if the ministry wanted to control the final image of Jimmy Swaggart one last time, and in doing so, they left many wondering. Was this a tribute to a redeemed soul, or a calculated rewrite of history? While the public funeral was tightly controlled, what happened in the last few hours of Jimmy Swaggart's life, behind closed doors, has become the center of new speculation and whispered conversations. In a quiet room just down the hall from his longtime bedroom in the Baton Rouge estate, Jimmy Swaggart was surrounded by only his closest family members: Frances, his wife of over 70 years, their son Donnie, and a small group of trusted ministry aides. The world knew nothing yet. The media hadn't been alerted. There was no camera crew, no lights, no choir, just a frail man, a hospital bed, a Bible resting on his lap, and the undeniable sound of finality settling in the room. One of the aides present that night, a man who had worked for the ministry for over 3 decades, has recently spoken out under condition of anonymity, and what he revealed sent shockwaves through the Swaggart camp. According to this source, in the final hours before his death, Jimmy Swaggart became unusually quiet. He gripped Frances' hand tightly. His breathing was shallow, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. Then he turned toward the aide and asked everyone else to leave the room, except him. What happened in that room has been described as a broken man finally unloading the weight he carried for over 30 years. The aide claims that Swaggart whispered a brief confession. He didn't name names, didn't give details, but he allegedly said something chilling. "I was warned. The first time. I knew what I was risking. I kept going anyway." He paused, then added, "It was never about power, not in the beginning. But I lost sight of the cross, and then, in a moment that left the aide in tears, Swaggart reportedly whispered, 'Tell them. I tried to come back. I tried. I just didn't know how.'" These final words, if true, paint a devastating picture of a man trapped not just by public scandal, but by his own guilt. They offer a glimpse into the inner torment of someone who once stood as a spiritual giant and perhaps died as a deeply conflicted soul. Now here's where it gets even more mysterious. Just days after his death, that same aide was quietly let go from his position at Sun Life Ministries. No official reason was given, but internal sources say that higher-ups were concerned about potential leaks and wanted to preserve the public image of the ministry. The ministry has neither confirmed nor denied the account. When asked directly, a spokesperson simply said, "Brother Swaggart went to be with the Lord in peace." Any words spoken at the end were between him and God, but silence only fuels speculation. Supporters are now torn. Some say the confession proves Jimmy was truly repentant. Others see it as too little, too late, a quiet admission of a legacy forever stained by spiritual contradiction. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part? The very message Jimmy Swaggart spent decades preaching, redemption, forgiveness, grace, was something he struggled to fully embrace for himself. Because what happens when the preacher can no longer believe his own sermon? What happens when the man who offered healing to millions can't find healing for himself? With Jimmy Swaggart gone, the question many feared to ask suddenly became unavoidable. What happens to the empire he built, and who is truly in control now? For decades, Jimmy Swaggart Ministries revolved around one man. His name, his voice, and his scandals were inseparable from the brand. His televised sermons, piano-led worship songs, and fiery preaching weren't just spiritual content. They were the entire identity of Sun Life Broadcasting Network and Family Worship Center. But now, without Swaggart's presence, a quiet power vacuum has emerged. The expected successor was clear: Donnie Swaggart, Jimmy's only son, who had long served as a co-pastor and frequent presence on Sun Life. Donnie had inherited his father's charisma and even mirrored some of his preaching style. But internally, ministry insiders say Donnie lacks one thing Jimmy had in excess: unquestioned loyalty and fear-based reverence. According to multiple reports, some staff members feel Donnie is too tied to the old-school way, unwilling to adapt to the modern religious landscape. Others argue that Donnie's emotional preaching style and public outbursts, often caught on live broadcasts, have made him a polarizing figure, even within their own community. And then there's Gabriel Swaggart, Donnie's son and Jimmy's grandson, young, polished, and hungry to push the ministry into the future. Gabe, as he's affectionately called by younger followers, leads the Crossfire Youth Ministry and hosts several modernized Christian broadcasts. He's active on social media, aligns with younger conservative evangelicals, and has become the face of a more media-savvy, brand-friendly version of Swaggart Ministries. But behind the scenes, tensions are growing. "There's a generational clash happening," said one former staffer. "Donnie wants to preserve Jimmy's legacy exactly as it was. Gabriel wants to move past it, modernize, rebrand, and reach the next generation." This tug of war isn't just about leadership. It's about identity, control, and the future of one of the most infamous ministries in America. Financially, the ministry is at a crossroads. Donations reportedly dropped during Jimmy's final years, and with his passing, longtime elderly donors, many of whom saw Jimmy as irreplaceable, are now quietly pulling back. Meanwhile, the cost of running a national broadcasting network isn't small. Sun Life operates television, radio, and digital streams in multiple countries. And with falling viewership, questions are now being asked. Can Donnie and Gabriel keep it going? Will scandals from the past finally cause the empire to collapse? Or will they rebrand and rise again under new leadership? One media analyst noted that the ministry's YouTube presence and streaming numbers have stagnated, especially among viewers under 40. While Gabriel's outreach has seen some growth, the brand itself still carries the heavy baggage of Jimmy Swaggart's name. And now, in a controversial move, there are whispers that the ministry might consider dropping Swaggart from its official branding. a symbolic decision that would represent both a fresh start and a quiet burial of a complicated legacy. But not everyone agrees. Frances Swaggart, Jimmy's widow and longtime ministry matriarch, reportedly opposes any rebranding efforts. According to those close to her, Frances believes the Swaggart name is anointed and should remain at the forefront of the ministry until the day Jesus returns. This internal division is now being felt among viewers as well. Some longtime followers have written to Sun Life demanding that Jimmy's legacy be protected. Others are pushing for full transparency, a public acknowledgement of past failures, and a modern commitment to accountability. What happens next could determine whether Jimmy Swaggart Ministries fades into history or reinvents itself in ways few could have imagined. Because in the end, the question isn't just who takes over. The question is, can a ministry built around one flawed man survive without him? As the lights dim inside Family Worship Center, as the echoes of gospel music fade into memory, as the name Jimmy Swaggart transitions from present tense to past, the world is left asking a question it's been too afraid to confront for decades. Who was he really? To some, he was a prophet of fire, a preacher who gave voice to revival, who led millions to salvation through the simplicity of the cross and the raw passion of his preaching. His music, his charisma, his message, they were the very things that awakened faith in hearts cold and broken. To others, he was a hypocrite cloaked in scripture, a man who preached against sin from the pulpit while wrestling with his own behind closed doors. A man who fell, not once, but twice, then refused accountability, choosing instead to rebuild his platform and control the narrative of his failure. For many of us who grew up watching Jimmy Swaggart on TV, it's not easy to untangle the two. We remember the man crying, sweating, singing at the piano with trembling fingers. We remember his passionate altar calls and firebrand warnings about eternity. We remember his scandals, his defiance, his silence, and now, his death. The tragedy of Jimmy Swaggart may not be the sin itself, but the lost opportunity for full redemption, the kind of honest, public, broken repentance that could have helped a generation trust again. He spoke often about grace, but in the eyes of many, he never fully modeled it. Not with transparency, not with humility, not with true vulnerability. Still, there are those who believe Jimmy Swaggart was used by God in spite of it all. If it weren't for Jimmy, I wouldn't be saved today, wrote one viewer online. I know he messed up, but I've messed up too, and his message still reached me. God used a broken man. That gives me hope. That's the bittersweet truth about legacy. Sometimes it isn't clean. Sometimes it's contradictory. Sometimes it's both holy and human. And maybe that's the legacy Jimmy Swaggart truly leaves behind. Not as a saint or a villain, but as a living reminder that even the most powerful voices in the church are still just men. His funeral was quiet, controlled. His final days, riddled with tension and a whispered confession. His ministry now sits at a crossroads, balancing generational shifts and theological identity crises. But the question now shifts from, who was Jimmy Swaggart, to, what do we learn from his life? Do we idolize less and discern more? Do we demand accountability and still extend grace? Do we finally talk openly about the damage spiritual leaders can cause when their private failures go unchecked? Or do we, like many before us, bury the truth with the man and move on? Jimmy Swaggart is gone, but the legacy he left behind is still pulsing, alive in every worship broadcast, every sermon replay, every stained glass church where someone still remembers the first time they heard his voice. And maybe, just maybe, that legacy is now ours to shape. If this story moved you, challenged you, or opened your eyes, don't just click away. Like this video to support honest storytelling. Comment below. Was Jimmy Swaggart a preacher you trusted? Did his ministry help or hurt your faith? We want to hear your story. Subscribe for more deep dive investigations into the lives, legacies, and hidden truths behind the most controversial public figures. And share this video with someone who remembers the voice of Jimmy Swaggart, because the truth deserves to be heard, even after death. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay discerning, stay real.